Welcome to week 83 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've watched episode 400, which originally aired Monday, February 24th, 1986. And been getting a lot of ads from Cineplex for a movie called Ambulance, which opens tomorrow, April 8th, in real time. And Abe Martinez is in it, because I think I saw some photos of him at the premiere. So, as a Cruise fan, you might want to see Ambulance. He's not the star.
I don't know if we had mentioned before, but we actually saw Abe Martinez on an episode of Falcon Crest.
That's true, yeah. I don't know if we mentioned that one or not.
Plays a bad guy.
And not really related to Santa Barbara, but, all these 70s and 60s and 50s shows we're constantly watching, Nehemiah Persoff passed away yesterday at the age of 102. And he has appeared in a lot of things. And we just saw him in a Hawaii 502 2 nights ago. The gun for McGarrett or something. Something about a gun, anyway, I think. That's it for the real world, I think. Kirk watches the cabin explode. He starts towards the cabin and then changes his mind and gets in his car and drives away. And I thought, oh no, Kirk. But the next thing we see him, he's at a payphone calling for an ambulance. So that's actually pretty good, because without that ambulance, they would have been in a lot more trouble. And then, of course, Kirk heads back to Santa Barbara to pretend he has no idea where Eden is.
Now, I did think, actually, when we were talking about this last time, that this could actually be a hero moment for Kirk. But he's a little too shaken by it, I think.
I guess he just realizes there's no excuse for him being there, right?
Yeah.
Because he spends the rest of the day hiding the fact that he knows there's been an explosion. Mary comes to, finds Cruz, and Cruz finds Eden, who is a little worse off. She takes some time to regain consciousness. Mark is found outside, and I guess, being nearest the propane tanks, he got the brunt of it. He doesn't regain consciousness for quite a while, at least till after the paramedics arrive. So they got 2 ambulances. They said, we've called Mr. Capwell. Do you want us to call anyone else? And Eden says, call my husband, Kirk Cranston, which kind of is a bit of a blow to Cruz. In the second ambulance, Cruz reveals to Eden that he rescued the letters. He thought they looked important, and she asks him to destroy them. And he says, consider it done. So I wonder if he will destroy those letters without reading them.
Yeah, I can think of a lot that could happen to those letters between now and when he actually gets around to destroying them. I mean, he could go back to his place. Of course, it's a mess because Kirk was rampaging there. And just put them down somewhere. I could see Santana finding them and reading them, for example.
I was thinking Pearl, but Santana would be worse.
Yeah. So I think they could fall into a lot of different hands on their way to being destroyed.
In the first ambulance, Mark finally wakes up and asks Mary to put on the engagement ring. It's literally the first thing he thinks of doing. And she does so. Kirk is hovering near the phone when Cece finally gets the call. But Cece pretends only Mary is in the hospital. And Kirk says, I'll come with you. And she says, no reason. No reason to. So Kirk is stuck at the Capwell house without knowing how Eden and Cruz are, and also having to pretend he doesn't know that Eden and Cruz are in the hospital as well. So Kirk gets an idea. I forget who's watching him. It might be Ted. He pretends to call the hospital to check up on Mary, and then goes, what? There was a second ambulance with Eden and Cruz in it? And runs out the door. When he gets to the hospital, of course, he's a bit upset with Cece for not telling him that Eden was in an accident.
And I can't remember how Cece kind of blows that off, but to me that sort of shows potentially another little tear in their relationship.
Yeah, he said something to blow it off, and then I think that's when they wheeled Eden in, so that distracted them from that conversation. Still at the casino, Brick tells Kelly and Ted that he feels really bad for the Wallaces, whose son is dead. Sophia joins them, which makes Brick uncomfortable, and he gets anxious that this was the whole plan, and he says, if only Minx hadn't brought me to Santa Barbara. And then Brick accuses them of trying to have Channing back. And they say they just want a chance to get to know him.
Yeah, Brick's kind of a miserable sod through most of this episode. I do see some potential for Brick's attitude to soften over time, though, because at the end of this episode, Sophie actually, he ends up at the hospital as well, and which we'll get into how that happens, but Sophie actually says to him, one thing you will find with me is that I care about my children more than anything in the world. All my children. So, and you can see his face. It seemed to me that really touched him in some way.
Yeah, I just get a sense he may have a better relationship with Sophia than Cece in the end, even though Sophia kind of is, the cause of all the problem. I mean, Minx is, but...
Yeah, and we haven't really seen him and Lionel together at all, in any of these recent episodes.
Nick manages to avoid telling Kelly that the book's been cancelled for much of the episode. But when she tells him she's quit her job so she can devote all her time to his book, then he finally has to tell her. She, of course, has been rejecting messages from these less than stellar job offers that are coming in because she didn't realize that Nick had scrabbled to try and get some money in. And she says that he doesn't need to worry about money because she can pay rent. And this is unexpectedly 100% not what Nick wants. He wants to pay for everything, not just his half. So he's kind of a bit like Dylan in that way.
I was thinking that myself, actually. They've both got this pride, and of course Dylan, as we've seen, has been trying to basically become a miniature CC, which really isn't what anyone wants. And with Dylan, we're seeing him be very prideful, and I'm wondering if, this is what really set the stage for Cruz and Eden to break up, when Cruz got very prideful about her setting up a position for him in the police department. And I'm wondering if we're seeing perhaps a repeat pattern with him being very prideful and that pushing Kelly away, because certainly Dylan's pridefulness has not endeared him to Kelly, and I don't think that will work with Nick either.
I wonder if people would be that concerned with it if it was 2022 and not 1986. I feel things have shifted a little bit in the world. Although you kind of have to, I guess, have a complex if you're dating someone from a very wealthy family and you're not. A photo of Sophia falls out of Cece's pockets, and he remembers. He has a voiceover flashback of her telling him that she's going to have a son, and he will be named Channing. Mason tells Cece to stay out of Mary's life, referring to the fact that he's sent Kirk and Mary on a prenuptial honeymoon. He says, she's very, in a delicate state. She's just come out of a convent. And Cece says, well, and it's a good thing she's not dating you. Cece hands Kelly's job over to Kirk. So we will be seeing Kirk at the casino now in charge, and I don't know if he and Brick and Dylan will get along as well as, Kelly and Dylan don't get along, but we'll see how Kirk shakes things up when he starts hanging around the casino all day.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping for a bit of butting heads between him and Dylan. And as I've said before, I think actually, I think a lot of people, it's funny, Brick is just kind of off being Brick, but I'm starting to sense there could be a lot of people having calculations around him just because of who he is, which is probably what he's most afraid of in life, actually. But as I've said, I think he could be seen as a bit of competition or a bit of a threat to Kirk.
I can see Kirk being the one who realizes Warren's checks have been bouncing and is the one who puts the screws to Warren. Cece asks Kirk how he cut his hand. So it looks like it was just the right hand, the same hand he cut punching through Cruz's window. So I don't know if all the blood on his palm was, from that wound getting worse from all the work he did trying to wrench open that propane tank, or if he actually did injure himself on the palm side as well, and that hand's totally messed up now. But Kirk says that he stupidly grabbed at some metal that came loose from the piping on his new hot rod. So Cece buys that. Mason tells Amy to keep Brick away from Cece, suggesting that he might hurt Brick because he was so obsessed with Channing.
Yeah, I think that's possibly a little bit of foreshadowing.
I can see the Brick and Sophia relationship maybe being the focus for the next little while, but there's the relationship with Cece lingering in the background a bit too.
I could also see it being, a little bit the other way almost. We've already seen the conversation that Brick had with Kelly and Ted, where he said, you're just trying to get your brother back. And I don't actually think that's true in their case, but I could maybe see that being true in Cece's case.
And, they've still, the way they've done it, they've kind of managed to keep Eden out of it. So we still haven't really seen how Eden feels about it. She may well hate Brick, That may be something they're keeping in their back pocket. I think she really loved Channing, and I think she may be troubled by this whole thing. And remember how upset she was with her mother over everything.
Well, and as I've said, there may be that element, or there may be just the fact that Brick has these mad business skills. So that's yet another person who's potentially going to maybe take a bit of the Capwell Enterprises pie, potentially.
Well, I wonder this new thing where Cece asked Kirk to get some Armonte files. Is it possible Sophia will ask Brick to oversee the Armonte sides of things to try to fend off, a takeover from Cece or something, or some kind of, they were merged, I believe, so I don't know, but, Cece might spitefully try to ruin some parts of that company. I don't know.
Also, it hasn't been mentioned for about a year, but, Mason was scheming with his mother to do something that was going to be very damaging to Capwell Enterprises. So we haven't heard about that for a while, but maybe that could get thrown in the mix at some point too.
And it's around this point that Sophia gets a call to tell her about the explosion, and she, Amy, Brick, and Mason pile into the helicopter. So there, luckily Dylan leased a helicopter last episode. Eden explains to Sophia that a friend arranged for her and Cruz to meet at the cabin and that nothing happened. Sophia says to Eden that she's so much like her. Something that Eden would have been really upset with just a few months ago.
Yeah.
Brick arrives to see how Eden is, and that's when Sophia tells him that the most important thing to her is her children, him included. Mason notices the ring on Mary's hand, and when the hospital needs someone to authorize Mark's surgery, Mary says that she's his fiancée. So Mason seems a little disappointed by that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I think Mary is someone, as we've seen, who, once she's given her word, that for her is something that she takes very seriously. So I think that, even though we can see she's not actually overly enthused about Mark, I think she will consider herself to be his fiancée.
Do you think she should go so far as to marry him just because of that?
Well, I don't know if she would, but I really am expecting Mark to go nuts at some point.
Maybe she'll marry him as a deathbed, favor, and then everyone will be surprised when Mark pulls through and she's stuck married to him.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be I think it'll be a dutiful situation rather than a really passionate one on her side.
Cece and Kirk both wonder why Cruz and Eden spent so many hours together after realizing that there was a setup and, that they were both called there by Pearl. Cruz doesn't let on it was Pearl. But Cruz refuses to answer why they hung out there for another 8 hours. But when Cruz takes his jacket off, Kirk spots the letters in Cruz's pocket. And he bursts into Eden's room, demanding for her to admit that she's having an affair with Cruz. And she, of course, won't have any idea what he's talking about. So that'll just make him madder. Maybe he'll try and blow up the hospital next.
Yeah, I definitely, and I don't know how thin the walls are in that hospital if he's yelling and screaming about her having an affair, if everyone else in the hospital is going to be hearing that as well.
I think Cece might try to run Cruz out of town the way he did Joe, if he really thinks that that's what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That is it for this episode. I just was doing a quick look ahead, and I noticed that one of our original cast members has only 10 more appearances before they're gone forever. And then another one has only 9 more appearances before they're gone forever.
That'll be exciting. I can't guess who it is.
No, you can feel free to at any point before they vanish. But it's sad to lose original cast members, especially on this show when the casting was so amazing right from the beginning on almost all the characters. We had a full credits, and the main credits once again have a slash between Capwell and Armonte. Maybe there are 2 battling people who write up the credits, and one of them likes the slash and the other one doesn't. And of course, in the last time we had credits was episode 396, so only 4 episodes back. And of course, the appraiser, Parker Whitman, hasn't returned since then. But Dr. Lewis was credited, and first paramedic, David Mack. So that would be, there were 4 paramedics, because they needed 2 people to carry each of those gurneys. But I guess only one of them had a speaking line when he said, who else do you want us to call? So that is it for episode 400. So it was a big explosive 400 episode, wasn't it?
Yes,
maybe
it
they did
was.
Plan that, even though, in 1986, no one was on the internet every day. No one would have even known that was episode 400 unless they'd been keeping track themselves. Which I'm sure some people were. We'll be back after we watch episode 401. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 401 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Tuesday, February 25th, 1986. Kirk tells Eden to tell him the truth. Cruz comes into the room, and Eden asks him to leave. Cece tells Cruz that he should leave because he has no official business here. We're sticking with family tonight. You're not on the inside. Cece says that Cruz still has certain feelings for Eden. Cruz said, just because she's married doesn't mean those old things didn't happen. Eden tells Kirk that she and Cruz are friends, are just friends, but Kirk doesn't want to accept that she has any feelings at all for Cruz. Later, Cruz sneaks back into Eden's room, and Pearl keeps Kirk out by asking him if he's bought any good alibis lately. He tells Kirk that Eden's having a painful procedure, and if he barges in the middle, the doctor will have to start over, and he'll be subjecting Eden to all that pain from the start. So Kirk wanders off, annoyed. Eden tells Cruz she wants her marriage to work and that they want to have a child. And Cruz says, why do you want to have a baby with Kirk when you can have mine? Eden decides to check herself out of the hospital. But it actually takes her quite a while to leave. Mark sees that Mary is wearing his ring, and as they wheel him into the OR, Janice shows up and has a few nice conversations with Mason in this episode. Janice tells Mason that Mason tells Janice that Mary and Mark are getting married, and she's suddenly a bit on edge. She says that unless Mark has changed a lot, Mary could be making a terrible mistake. So more of our thoughts that Mark may go off the rails at some point. She says that Mark is very demanding. And then she also admits to Mason, probably a mistake, that she thinks that Mark really did accidentally kill that patient and that he altered her chart afterwards. But don't tell anyone, right? Mason says, I'm only going to tell Mary. So, yeah, this seems like an odd way for the secret to suddenly come out after all these years. She just suddenly tells the one person who would use it against Mark.
Yeah, I feel like Mason's gonna, spend a lot of time trying to tell Mary, and she's gonna spend a lot of time protesting that he's not being fair to Mark. And maybe they will have to get married before we see this other side of Mark, I should say. But it's one of those things where I sort of feel like I feel like that's what we're going to go through, but I just feel like it would all be so much easier if Janice just told Mary. But I strongly suspect that's not going to happen.
It's on the Another Worlds we're watching from 1980, Miranda Bishop has this tape that's been floating around for months, and threatening to end up in the hands of the DA, etc. Whereas here we have a piece of information that was revealed months ago and then not talked about it again, and then the person who knows it reveals it. So it's sometimes, I guess, when you're writing a soap, it's hard to work out how is this going to get out.
Yeah.
Just have the person tell the other person eventually, after the audience wonders for months, how is this information going to get out?
I'm not sure really what Mason will do about it. I guess he could try and do something about it legally after the fact. Perhaps that would stir things up even more between him and Mary. But I feel like he's just going to use it as an argument to make to Mary. But
I don't know how, I mean, I already don't think Mary really wants to marry Mark, so, but I don't know if that's going to help at all.
Yeah. I guess I'm just foreseeing a fairly tiresome, long argument between Mason and Mary until she actually marries Mark and finds out for herself.
Eden's still in the hospital because she's having a conversation with Mary in the chapel. And they talk about Mark a bit. I don't remember if they talk about Cruz or Kirk, really, because just kind of came and went, that scene, I think. Mark comes out of surgery. And Mason overhears him telling Mary that because of her, he has something to live for. So that may push her towards marrying him now, because he's got something to live for.
Well, and she has already put on his ring, and she's calling herself his fiancée. I just don't see Mary really being the type to go back on those kind of commitments unless she has very good reason to.
So you're thinking she may be married to Mark before she finds out what she should have figured
I think
out.
so, or, unless it reaches a point where Mark feels that level of comfort with her that, is secure enough with her that he can unveil this other side of himself.
Mm-hmm. Cece gets called away when Rosa phones to say that Gina is with Brandon. So Cece rushes home and tells Gina to get out. She's making a phone call when he gets there. He says, "Put a quarter on the desk and get out." Gina tells Cece that Brandon's spirit is gone from living in this mausoleum. So Cece says, "Okay, I'll send him to live with Santana." And he kicks Gina out. I think Kirk wanders by at one point, but it's not really relevant. Cruz visits Pearl's apartments. The fake one, that's all messy. Pearl goes through the secret closet door to get him some brandy and pours it into some styrofoam cups. But by the time they get around to toasting, Cruz has decided he wants to go back to the hospital. And Eden's still there, so he offers her a ride home. And she says, no, Mason's calling me a cab. But in the end, Mason returns and says it's going to be an hour or something. So she agrees to let Cruz drive her home. And then we see him walking her up to the door, which I thought was crazy. And he wants to come in, but she says, "Well, I think Kirk's already got enough reason to be upset with us from today. Let's just have you leave at this point," which I think was a good idea. I think she probably should have let him drop her off at the bottom of the driveway.
It was kind of interesting looking at this storyline. Of course, we as an audience have seen how completely unhinged Kirk is, and we're always on Cruz's side because he's kind of a good guy, and we know that about him. But if you didn't have that background information, you can kind of see why Cruz's behavior would be at least a little bit annoying, if not a bit concerning, and where Kirk would be within his rights to be a little bit upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because we know these characters and we've seen all of these sorts of private aspects of them that we get the real picture. But that's why I'm a little bit forgiving of CC, even though I think he's got terrible, terrible taste. But I can kind of understand why he's taking the stance he is.
In the study, Kirk looks at a photo of Eden and calls her a lot of names, including a liar. Kirk flings the letter opener as the door opens, but doesn't hit the person who it is, which is Gina. She's sneaked back in the servant's entrance, apparently. She tells Kirk that Brandon is sick, and Kirk says he'll call him a doctor. Gina, annoyed with this, decides, as usual, to say something nasty to Kirk and says, "Oh, I heard all about Eden and Cruz at the cabin," pretending, to be worried that they're hurt, but really just trying to needle Kirk. What did happen? It's not like the Capwells to let their properties fall into disrepair. That's for the people. And then she spots his bandaged up hand, and just like Cece before, asks what's wrong with his hand. Kirk, of course, doesn't answer. Kirk calls the hospital and finds out that Eden's been released. And when Eden returns home, everything in the atrium is dark, but Kirk is skulking behind the pillars. And then he throws the letter opener into the room, making a clattering sound, so Eden goes to pick it up. And he sneaks up behind her, and she kind of screams when he grabs her. And he goes, "Oh, I love you so much, Eden." She is exhausted and wants to go upstairs. And he says, "Yes, I love you, Eden. You'll never know how much." Maybe she will eventually.
Yes, and of course, poor old Eden, through all of this, is all sort of battered and bruised looking. So you can see why everybody wanted her to stay in hospital for another day or two.
Mm-hmm. I think she's largely checked out because she wants to assuage Kirk's fears that she's secretly seen Cruz.
I think that's really the big reason, and maybe because Cruz has been, he's been pretty determined in seeing her and tending to her. I think she's maybe a little bit concerned that in her weakened state she might be a bit more tempted by him than she would like to be.
And that is it for this episode. We had some credits. The main credits are the same. Sophia has a slash in her name. And last time we had Dr. Lewis and First Paramedic in the second section. This time we have Janice Harrison, Kathy Shower, Dr. Lewis, Mark Harrison. So is Janice ever in the main credits? I don't think so.
I don't think she has been.
She's always just been on, I don't know what they call it. Dr. Lewis. So that must have been Eden's doctor. And that's it. We'll be back after we see episode 402. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's unlike the Capwells to let their property fall into disrepair. Only the people on it are allowed to do that.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 402 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Wednesday, February 26th, 1986. Mark urges Mary to marry Mason if he dies. Mark tells Mason that he and Mary were never going to make it, but Mason urges Mark to marry Mary. Mark asks Janice to forgive him for making her lie in the stand. Janice tells Mark she lied because she loved him. But he mustn't start his life with Mary with a lie. So Mark tells Mary he lied in court and changes his patient's chart. This is like an episode of Soap. Mary says everyone makes mistakes and says she wants to marry Mark. The doctor tells Mason and Mary that he's stopped Mark's bleeding for now, but he might not live much longer. So she should marry Mary right away. No, she should marry Mark right away. So Mary should marry Mark right away. I should just do this in the style of Soap, right? Now, for people who don't all start with an M, So yeah, we had talked about possibly Mary rushing to marry Mark if it looked like Mark was going to die.
Yeah, and I have to say this really surprised me because I thought we might see a whole long drawn out thing of Mason trying to dissuade her and bringing up Mark's past and her not listening. But anyway, none of that
It
really
all
happened.
came and went
Yeah.
within an episode. Janice was even brought in, and she kind of gave her blessing a little bit, and you know, everything came out, and Mary was fine with it. I think she's kind of in shock though, but I think she was just in a cabin explosion, so I don't know if she'll realize this is a great idea. But someone said I'll call the Monsignor at the end of the episode, so presumably that's who's going to marry them?
And Mason even took my suggestion and suggested to Mary that she talk to Janice, and Mary said no, so that's on her now. So yeah, it moved along very quickly.
Pearl apologizes for almost getting Cruz and Eden killed. So Cruz, this is Pearl and Cruz driving in the car. I don't know where they were driving, but I think Cruz said he was going up to look at the cabin to investigate why that thing exploded. He thinks maybe when he and Mark were messing with the propane tank, they might have done something to the valve. Pearl asks Cruz for advice regarding Julia. Julia has a new office. They've built a nice little tiny office for Julia that's about the size, smaller than Dylan's office at the casino, if I know rightly. Smaller even maybe than Amy's little secretary area when she was Jack Stanfield Lee's secretary. And it's crammed full of stuff, plants and whatnots. So Julia's got everything. Probably because she's moved out of the Capwell mansion, she's moved all her stuff into that little office. Pearl shows up at Julia's office, and she says she's too busy to talk, but he wants to discuss the bet. So he says, I'll take a letter, and Julia dictates to him that she... How does it go? Let me just say. She says she's too busy to talk, and he says she can dictate a letter to him regarding paying up for their bet. Julia says she declines dinner with Pearl. But she doesn't recognize his shorthand when she looks at it, and turns out he's written it in Arabic. Julia says, you don't know Arabic, and Pearl says, you can't even believe me when I'm trying to show off. So another of Pearl's many talents has come out. Julia says there's no way she can have dinner with him because she'll be working at least until 9. So he kisses her on the cheek and says he'll pick her up at 9. So Julia's kind of trying to get out of the whole everything with Pearl, not because she's not charmed by him, just because I think she doesn't think it will be a good match. But maybe when the secret of Pearl comes out, she'll find out that maybe they are a good match after all.
I'm really interested to see how all that unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact, you mentioned it when we were reviewing the last episode that Cruz shows up in Pearl's fake apartment, I think indicates that maybe he doesn't know Pearl's real identity either.
I don't think so. I'm trying to remember when it comes out, and I feel like it's when Pearl has his adventure with Kelly. So that might be a couple of months away. Cruz explains to Santana that Pearl tricked him and Eden into going up to the cabin. Santana's not that really concerned about one way or the other about that. Cruz asks her out to dinner, and she declines. And Cruz says, you've been acting kind of weird since that meeting with Mr. C. What exactly did he say? But Santana says he'll find out soon enough. Then Santana calls someone and talks to them at first in Spanish regarding a quick wedding. So this is interesting because she's clearly not trying to get Cruz to marry her today, but is interested in a quick wedding. So I don't know if she's got someone else in mind. Nick and Kelly spent the night in Kelly's room at the Capwell mansion last night, and Nick's getting dressed in a hurry in the morning, and Kelly teases him about being worried that Cece was going to come in with a shotgun. But he has a meeting to repitch his book to Mr. Jenkins with some slight changes, and Jenkins agrees to let Nick sell the book on his own. And he will need to advertise it himself too, and that's going to cost around $3,000.
Yeah.
So, Dylan has a new apartment. Yeah, it's 2 new sets today. I don't know if they would build an expensive set for Dylan if he was going to be leaving anytime soon. So I feel like we might be seeing Dylan for a while longer. Kelly shows up at the new place and demands he write that check for Nick that he owes him. Dylan insults Nick the entire time, including, what's he going to do, set up a little stand at the casino to sell his book? Kelly gives the check to Nick, but thinks over what Dylan was saying to her and thinks that Nick might not succeed in this, self-published venture, or self-selling the book. So she says that, maybe she could pitch in on things once again, and she says, I wish you would treat me as an equal. But Nick says, I'll never have this kind of money. And Kelly says, I don't care about the money or this house. What if you can't salvage the book? And Nick goes, what, you think I'm a failure? I'm not, and I'm going to prove it to you. So he freaks out as much as Dylan the first time we saw Dylan freak out. Of course, Dylan's freakouts have accelerated greatly in the several weeks since the first time he flipped out, and I'm wondering if the Hartley brothers have the same mental illness that might cause them both to go nuts. We've predicted Nick going nuts and trying to harm Kelly several times in the past.
Yeah.
So now...
and Dylan as well. So.
Yeah. So now we have possibly 2 psychos. That'd be like if Mannix had 2 of his former buddies from Korea go nuts and try to shoot everyone in town.
And this really made me think a lot about how different both of them are acting than Joe acted in this kind of situation. They're both now have this completely ego-driven drive to succeed and show Kelly. And Joe, as you remember, was completely the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
He was just going to do what he was going to do, and he felt that he was worthy of Kelly as himself. And Kelly, of course, as we know, likes that a lot better. So I think this is a losing strategy for both of the Hartley brothers.
It's somewhat ironic. They've both settled into the exact same mindset in the end.
Yeah. And actually, at this point, almost, I would love it if some other guy came in and swept Kelly off her feet and left the 2 Hartley brothers battling it out on the sidelines.
Well, if things don't work out with Julia, there's always Pearl. Nick returns the check to Dylan, yet again, and Dylan offers him a job as a bouncer at the casino. So, of course, he's a little pissed off that Nick just didn't take the money and swallow his pride. I mean, he owes him the money, so why wouldn't he just take it?
Exactly.
So he takes digs at Nick the whole time and about how long do you think he can support Kelly, the usual stuff.
Yeah.
Nick asks Cruz if he knows of any PI work. Cruz says, how much do you need? I might be able to lend you some. But turns out it's $3,000. Now, Cruz just bought a beach house. There's no way he has extra money. I mean, we just bought this place. And we're like, are we going to be able to pay the property taxes with the cash we have in the bank? Or are we going to have to borrow from our retirement savings? So. And
plus, Cruz is going to have to do some repair work on his beach house.
Yes, that's true. Because, as we know, there was a visitor the other day. Kirk Cranston contemplates strangling Eden with his tie while she sleeps. Uh-oh, I'd have to update that chart.
Well, if Mark dies, he's already committed murder, so...
That's true.
Which, we'll see if Cruz actually does a real investigation of that explosion.
He's got a lot of investigations going on right now. Kirk says, no, not this way. So I think the implication is he's decided to kill Eden after all. So yeah, he may have snapped. We may have to put some tissue paper over Kirk's brain because that's on its way to being damaged. Kirk overhears Santana tell Kelly that someone broke into Cruz's house. Santana phones Cruz, who was in the car with Pearl, at the time that someone broke into the beach house, and Kirk realizes he'd better go and cover his tracks a bit. So he breaks in again, and he steals some things, including a portable TV, which he ends up lugging around for half the episode due to what happens. But, he finds the little lockbox with all the list of suspects for pulling Cece's plug, and he sees the star next to his own name, which annoys him, and I guess he sees a key, which he doesn't realize what it's for at the time. And also uses, I think, a rug to wipe his fingerprints off the window, and some chair and some stuff in the kitchen. Because I remember when he was breaking in there, he was touching a lot of stuff. So I think, I don't know, I hope he got everything. So he's just about to leave, but then Santana arrives, so he quickly hides in the closet. And he watches Santana find the ring box, but he's taken the ring as part of his fake theft cover story. So he actually has Cruz's engagement ring for Eden in his pocket. Cruz does show up, and he checks his little strong box to make sure all his files are there. And he actually talks about the key with Santana, saying, "Oh yes, all the evidence is in a locker. Good thing they didn't steal the key." So Kirk finally, when they go into the bedroom to see if that's been robbed, finally sneaks out with his little TV that he's been holding on to in the closet. He had one aborted attempt to exit the closet and had to go back in at one point. So he goes out, and he just knows that key goes to a lock. So he doesn't have the key. But he we realize later, he has noticed the number. And he goes to the gym first, which I think we've seen that gym set once before when someone was playing tennis. And some guy is surprisingly chatty in the locker room. "Hey, you're new here, aren't you?" Yes. "Which is your locker?" And he goes, "I think it's either 230 or 320. He goes, "Oh, they only go up to 200 here." So the next thing, we see Kirk at the airport, and we see another set of lockers. So Santa Barbara is all the different types of lockers from the prop department. And he looks at 320 and 230, but they're both open, and nothing's in them. And then he arrives at the bus station. Now, the thing is, in the first episodes, when Joe Perkins was arriving at the bus station, it was a totally different configuration that we saw, and even some lockers, because that's where Mason found Santana with a gun. I think they were red, but this is some beige lockers that they've been using for the bus station, during this storyline. And Kirk tells the guard, "Oh, I lost my key and I gotta get on the bus." And the guard opens the locker for him and pulls out the bag with Eden's pink dress. And he goes, "I don't think this is yours. This is not a suitcase," and shoves it back in. And locks it up. And he goes, "Are you sure that was the right number?" And Kirk says, "I don't have time to try and guess again. I'm just going to leave." And then Kirk waits for a shift change, and the guard hands the keys to another guard. And then Kirk immediately comes around the corner. Like, the first guy's not even out of the employee entrance when Kirk comes around the corner. "Oh my God, I got to get on a bus, and I've lost my key to 320 or 230, whatever it is." And the guy goes, "Oh, can you describe the contents?" He says, "Yes, it's a beige bag with a pink dress, my wife's pink dress in it, and my shoes," because I remember Kirk's shoes were stolen by Pearl. And, of course, they match. So the guy just hands him all the evidence. So Kirk now has his own shoes back. He should just show up wearing those. And he has Eden's dress. Is it the fake one or the real one? He's got both. He's got the one Gina tried to burn and the other one. He's got everything.
So, when you think about it, if he is stopped in the car on the way home, he will actually potentially have himself incriminated in 3 crimes, because he's got all the stuff from the attempted murder of CC. He's got a portable TV and Cruz's engagement ring from the break-in at Cruz's house. And if he brought the wrench with him from the explosion at the cottage, he's got that too.
That could be in the trunk. Yeah, he might have thrown that in the back seat. Now, we don't know where Kirk brings this stuff. Does he still have his apartment?
Or a winery?
We don't know. He's got the winery. Could have hidden it behind a box of wine.
Maybe he'll try and hide it with Gina in her little Roach motel room.
He didn't seem to have in his hands, though, when we saw him arriving at the Capwell house. And Gina surprises him by calling his name, and he freaks out. He says, you just about gave me a heart attack. And Gina says, you don't have a heart. Well, we know from our chart he has a pink bit of tissue paper where his heart is. Kirk says that he knows Cece has promised Brandon to Santana if she gets married. And Gina says, I don't think she's going to marry Cruz. And Kirk says, she doesn't have to marry Cruz. Which is what we were just talking about. Has Santana got someone else in mind to marry? Gina tells Kirk that if he doesn't help her, he's just going to tell Cece everything. She's just going to tell Cece everything. Kirk says, how far are you willing to go to get Brandon back? And then Gina says, I'll do anything. Wow. Kirk says, I just might be able to help you out. And this is, I had accidentally come across this scene. Remember I told you a couple months ago when I was looking for screenshots. I'd accidentally come across a scene with Kirk and Gina that was a thing that I had completely forgotten about. So anyway, it leads into that. So that'll be kind of fun if it's, if it's as exciting as I remember, even though I just saw that little clip. So that's something we have to look forward to, whether it will be in the near future or May sweeps, I don't know. We are currently in, what month is it? February still? We're still in February, aren't we? So we're still in the February sweeps. So yeah, this exciting thing that I remember. We've got about a week or so before the sweeps run out. It could happen soon. And that is it for episode 402. And we will see what Kirk asks Gina to do, maybe in episode 403. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Kirk.
Oh, Gina, you just about gave me a heart attack.
Don't worry about it, since you don't have a heart.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 403 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, February 27th, 1986. Julia apologizes to Cruz for her part in Pearl's scheme. Cruz realizes from their discussion that Julia has been seeing Pearl. And he kind of warns her a little bit about that. Kirk shows up, and Julia says, hello, Kirk. Just like Seinfeld used to say, hello, Newman. Kirk pretends he just heard about the burglary and apologizes for attacking Cruz in the hospital. Pearl finishes proofreading a monograph and gives a scholarly gentleman his notes and also his Arabic translation. Pearl comments that no one speaks Hittite anymore, and Pearl has a completely different accent in this scene. The man asks Pearl under whose name he should be published this time. And he gives a name, Julia something. I didn't hear what last name he gave. Amy can't make it to work, so Buzz tries to get Pearl to cover, but he has a date. Julia tries to cancel their dinner plans because she has to meet a client. Instead, Pearl suggests dinner. It's 4:15, says Julia. She asks if he's going to lock himself in his closet again, and he says, what for? You've seen my only suit. She follows him into the closet, suspicious, but he tricks her by turning on the light suddenly and popping up behind her. And guess where Pearl has cleverly decided they should go for their 4:15 dinner? It's Buzz's place. He calls Buzz Buzzo. He asks for Buzzo's best Cabernet. And Julia wonders why he's reverted to this Pearl persona after giving her a glimpse of his other one. Pearl pretends to be offended by her snobbery, but he says that compared to her sister, Julia is an amateur. Pearl takes Julia back to Cruz's beach house for brandy and fire. And she flinches when he touches her, and he says, do I remind you of Kirk Cranston's father? Julia says she has certain things she wants to keep quiet just as he does. And Pearl says, let's call off the guessing game. And they kiss for, I think, a quite reasonable amount of time.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think when he had that little meeting earlier with the scholarly-looking man, and they were discussing the various translations, I believe the other man referred to him as doctor.
Oh, I'd forgotten to write that down.
So we're getting an indication now, or at least I am, that perhaps Pearl is a professor of something.
So perhaps not a criminal, as you had at one point theorized.
Well, he could be both still. He could be a forger with a scholarly background.
Mark tells Cruz that he started the fire by leaving the lantern near the leaking propane valve. But Cruz says he's pretty sure that valve was not leaking when they left it. CC tells Cruz his feelings for Eden are inappropriate, and Cruz tells CC to mind his own business. Cruz hands the letters back to Eden, saying, I decided not to burn them in case you wanted them. And she seems happy to have them back. The camera was actually on their faces at the time, so we didn't actually see the handoff, but presumably Eden is now in possession of the letters. Mason points out to Cece that Sophia is dating, and Kelly has 2 men, but Cece is not seeing anyone yet, which kind of annoys Cece a little bit. I think it's because he's probably been thinking about Sophia too much.
And Sophia, of course, as we know, has been flitting around town with a younger man. So kind of rubbing Cece's face in it, and Lionel's too.
Cece asks Kirk to pay for all of Mark's hospital bills before the wedding. And Kirk meets Dr. Norris, who Cece introduces as Brandon's child psychologist. So I guess Cece has maybe taken a little of what Gina said on board and decided that that's the solution for Brandon's problems. It's Mary's wedding day, and Christy Duvall and Theda Bassett are on vacation in Mexico and will not be attending the wedding. Oh, I think they said Mexico. And no one can find Mother Isabel either. So the only people that'll be there are some of the friends and family. Janice is actually at the hospital, but decides it would be inappropriate for her to attend the wedding, and so she leaves. So it's just Mary and Mark, the Monsignor, Cece, Eden, Cruz, and Mason. I believe that was it, because Kirk is late. Eden has lent Mary a dress. Mason has procured for her a bouquet and 2 rings. And Kirk watches through the window when he does arrive, and he sees how close Eden and Cruz are standing to one another. Long story short, Mary and Mark are married. Kirk borrows Brandon's Polaroid camera and takes a photo of the pink dress. Kirk tells Gina that Eden is the one pushing Cece to take Brandon away, and he's been behind all of the negative things that the family has done to Gina. That Eden has been pulling all those strings. Gina doesn't quite buy it. He says he tries to get her to convince her that Eden knows that Gina pulled the plug and that she's just trying to torture her for a while before she has Gina put away. To prove it to her, Kirk shows Gina the Polaroid of the pink dress that he took earlier. And, I think this freaks Gina out because Kirk says he found it in Eden's closet. So, Kirk says, or Gina then wants to go and confront Eden immediately. She's, of course, in the middle of a wedding in the next room. And Kirk says that'll just put Eden on notice. Gina says, I don't think there's any way I can stop Eden. And Kirk says, anybody can be stopped. And there's more than one way of stopping them. Gina says, what are you saying, Kirk? And that is the end of that episode. So what do you think Kirk will suggest to Gina?
I don't know. I mean, he seems to be going in a lot of directions. I mean, he was contemplating earlier the sort of ultimate way of stopping Eden, which was by thinking of killing her. So, and he's actually already tried to kill her, in fact, when he made the cabin explode. So that would be a quick way to end things, I guess.
If he could get Gina to kill Eden, well, he has a nice alibi, then he wouldn't be suspected of anything.
Now, of course, all this might put a bit of a crimp in his other grand scheme, which is to have the first son for CC. So I don't think his little schemes are all quite dovetailing yet. Though.
His plans are in conflict.
Yes.
Well, we'll find out if Gina tries to kill Eden when we watch episode 404 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Are you scared of me? Or do I look like Kirk Cranston's father?
On the last episode of Santa Barbara, Mark found out that he was dying, so he told Mary that she should marry Mason instead of marrying him. Mason told Mark that he and Mary would never work out, and that Mary should marry Mark instead of marrying Mason. Janice forgave Mark for making her lie. Mary forgave Mark for lying, and told Mark that she would marry him. The doctor told Mary that if she intended to marry Mark, she'd better do it soon. Will Mark die? Will Mark marry Mary? Will Mary marry Mason? If Mark does marry Mary, will Mason ever be Mary again? Or will someone marry Mason? These questions, and many others, will be answered on the next episode of Santa Barbara.
Welcome back.
Hello.
This week's hat is courtesy of a little grocery store on the big island of Hawaii where we went, and I forgot completely to bring any hats. And so early the first day we were rushing around trying to find a place that sold hats, and the only thing around was a grocery store, but luckily they had a little selection. Back in the real world in 1986, my two roommates both got interviews to work at Expo 86. I have yet to hear from them. So we will see how things go. On the show, episode 404 originally aired Friday, February 28th, 1985. So the last day of February, but yeah, as usual, the sweeps, lag a little into the next month, and things are still exciting, so perhaps we got a few more days of excitement ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Mary marries Mark. Then Mark starts to hemorrhage and gets rushed into surgery. So, goodbye to Mark. Cece tells Mason he's just waiting for Mark to die, just like he did when Cece was unconscious. Mason, of course, protests, saying he never wanted Cece to die. Oh, good news, the doctor returns. We fixed everything. Mark's going to live. The look on Mary's face when she saw that she was now married to Mark and that he was going to live was quite priceless. She was completely stunned by, I think, the whole day, really.
Yeah, now she's stuck with him, but the good news is we will get to see just how domineering and unpleasant and perhaps even unhinged Mark is in a marriage situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, he may be confined to a bed for the first little while of this marriage.
I'm sure we will start to see more creeping signs of it, though, as the series progresses.
Mm-hmm. So, what do we think Janice will be up to next? She's pretty much done with her Mark storyline. She hasn't really talked to Dylan in a while.
Yeah, and I think as Mark becomes more unhinged, perhaps we will see some scenes between Janice and Mary, comparing notes on his behavior. That's one thought I have.
I think Mason now, that he can't really pursue Mary anymore, Janice is potentially someone he's going to be spending more time with.
I think so. She's one of the people he does get along with. So I think that's a good bet. And we might even see some more love triangles occur if Janice and Mason get in the mix.
Mm-hmm. Brandon is so weak that he nearly falls down the stairs, and Rosa just manages to catch him before he topples over. Some good acting by Brandon Call there of playing a sickly child. Santana tells Rosa she's going to beat Cece at his own game by marrying a random stranger who just needs a green card. Rosa tries to convince her to marry Cruz instead, as you can imagine a mother would. Cece is making medical arrangements for Brandon while Gina is railing at him for everything, as usual. Santana tells Cece her plan, but wants to get Cece to sign a paper to confirm that he definitely will give her Brandon if she gets married. Now, I wouldn't have told him the plan in advance. I would have just asked for the paper first and then said, haha, I'm going to marry a random guy.
And I think getting a paper is a wise move. Although, remember, there was a paper that Mason oversaw a few months ago that would give custody to Santana, and that one didn't actually end up amounting to very much. So she needs a few more legal eyes on it, I think, if she ever does get her paper.
I think she's closer than she's ever been. Cece tells Rosa that someone really should tell Cruz about this crazy plan of Santana's. Rosa, of course, is just livid that Cece is making her do this, but knows that it really is in her best interest than Santana's to tell Cruz. So she tells Cruz about the plan, and Cruz says he will never forgive Mr. C. Santana meets Luis at Buzz's. But as she talks to him, she realizes she can't marry a man she can never love. So she has to give Luis the bad news. And then Mason walks in, and Santana says, perfect. So that love triangle you were thinking about earlier might be coming sooner than later. It could be a Mason-Santana-Janice love triangle.
That's what I'm thinking. Because we know from the beginning Mason had a crush on Santana from the time they were kids. Now, there hasn't actually been a lot of evidence of that with this particular iteration of Santana. There was a lot of sort of sexual underplay and flirting with the first Santana. It was a much stormier relationship with the second Santana, but you could still sense there'd been some passionate feeling there. With this one, we really haven't gotten that at all. So it almost feels like it's coming out of the blue, even though we know there's this history with the character.
Gina Gallegos Santana has gotten more attention from Pearl than Mason.
Yeah. And you know what you were saying, it's kind of interesting. She decides not to marry Luis because she realizes she would like to marry for love, and why does that necessarily make Mason a candidate unless she does have some feelings for him?
I think maybe she, also was thinking a little bit about Luis, being sort of stuck there trying to love her, and maybe if it didn't work out, he would be stuck where she knows Mason is interested. Yes,
I think some concern for Luis is probably part of this, and also I almost wondered if she was thinking about him. He's trying to get a green card. Could he possibly end up being blackballed by CC for being part of this situation that might torpedo his hopes completely?
Yeah, it's interesting the way this is all slotted together. With Mary marrying Mark, it's really put Mason completely free just at the right time when Santana needs to marry someone. So this, I don't know if we saw this coming, but it suddenly all fit into place in this episode. So, yeah, I think we're going to see a Mason-Santana wedding, and then, by the time things fall apart with Mark and Mary, Mason will be unavailable for Mary. That's the way these things usually go.
Now, I can't imagine CC is going to be thrilled if she marries Mason. But then again, Mason's a lawyer. He could maybe work out the paperwork in their favor.
And Mason could say, well, this is interesting. I'll get a hold over Brandon as well. There's that trust fund still.
Exactly. Now, the only thing about this, just speaking on a sort of personal level, is I've always rather liked the combination of Mason and Julia. So this seems to put that one even farther out of reach, just because I like it when Mason is paired with someone who's kind of his equal. So that's why I always enjoyed the scenes between him and Gina as well.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Will we manage to get in another wedding by the end of the sweeps, or will it be Mason and Santana in May? Double wedding with Kelly and Nick.
I just feel like everyone is going to get married before Kelly and Nick at this point.
Cece and Sophia will be married before Kelly and Nick.
Cruz and Eden will be married before Kelly and Nick at this point.
Kirk tells Gina there's more than one way to stop Eden. And then Gina kind of taunts him with the fact that Cruz and Eden are hanging out together outside of Mark's room after the wedding. But Gina still doesn't really believe that Eden is after her. Mm-hmm. So Kirk tells Gina that Eden is investigating that dressmaker that you had make the duplicate dress for you. And Gina tells Kirk she paid Mrs. Manzino a lot of money to keep her mouth shut. Next thing you know, Kirk is making various arrangements on the phone with various dressmakers and tells Eden that the items that she was having altered for her trip to Hawaii were parceled out to Mrs. Manzino by her regular dressmaker because of too much work. And Eden just buys that and heads on over to pick up her stuff for her trip. And of course, Kirk says, "Oh, I heard Eden talking to Mrs. Manzino. She's going to go there tonight." And Kirk and Gina stake out Mrs. Manzino's. Gina fully expecting nothing to happen, and then she's dumbfounded when Eden shows up. And she starts railing against Eden as they drive away and saying she's worse than Cece. I'm going to pull out every hair on her head. She's worse than Mason. I can't believe you married her. And Kirk ends up at the end telling her that he knows how bad Eden is. So they may be starting whatever plot Kirk has in mind in the next episode, now that he's got Gina as riled up as she needs to be to do whatever he wants her to do to Eden. But Eden's on her way to Hawaii, so maybe when she comes back, she'll have an unexpected late-night visit from Gina pretending to be a burglar or something. Mm-hmm. And that was it for this Friday episode. Lots of exciting things set up for next week. And that was it for week 83. So we will see you Monday, March 3rd for week 84. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Your husband's condition is stabilized.
What?
He's going to live. We're just as surprised as you are.
I'm getting you all wet.
So are you going to destroy me now?
Mark urges Mary to marry Mason if he dies. Mark tells Mason that he and Mary were never going to make it. But Mason urges Mark to marry Mason. No, urges Mark to marry Mary. Mason urges Mark to marry Mary. Mary, no. I'm going to start the whole thing over. Mark urges Mason to marry. Mark urges Mary to marry Mason if he dies. Mark tells Mason that he and Mary were never going to make it. But Mason urges Mark to marry Mary. Mark asks Janice to forgive him for making her lie in the stand. Janice tells Mark she lied because she loved him. But he mustn't start his life with Mary with a lie. So Mark tells Mary he lied in court and changes his patient's chart. This is like an episode of Soap. Mary says everyone makes mistakes and says she wants to marry Mark. The doctor tells Mason and Mary that he's stopped Mark's bleeding for now, but he might not live much longer. So she should marry Mary right away. No, she should marry Mark right away. So Mary should marry Mark right away. I should just do this in the style of Soap, right? Mark urges Mary to marry Mason if he dies. Mark tells Mason that he and Mary were never going to make it. Mason urges Mark to marry Mary. Mark asks Janice to forgive him for making her lie on the stand. Janice tells Mark she lied because she loved him, but he mustn't start his life with Mary with a lie.
Mark tells Mary he lied in court and changed his patient's chart. Mary says everyone makes mistakes and says she wants to marry Mark. The doctor tells Mason and Mary that he's stopped Mark's bleeding for now, but he might not live much longer, so she should marry him right away. On the last episode of Soap. Roddy. Okay,